So here I am on a nice frosty morning in Minnesota, thinking about Tu B'Shevat, which is the birthday of the trees. Well, on the Jewish calendar, it's coordinated to Israel, not northern Minnesota. So in Israel, it's spring, and there, people will indeed be planting trees. Here, however, if I want to plant a tree, I'm going to have to use some other alternative method because the only kind of bloom we have on the trees right now is frost, which is very pretty, but it doesn't produce fruit yet. However, there are ways you can donate to plant a tree. For many, many years, people have done that, donating to put trees in Israel, where they literally will go out and plant trees on Tu B'Shevat because the weather is good there for that. Some people have donated money to reforest or rainforest or to plant trees in places where there have been fires or hurricanes or tsunamis or whatever. So that's another way you can contribute. In a way, Tu B'Shevat has become a sort of Jewish Earth Day. It wasn't that originally. It was actually sort of tax day for how you determined when you would divide up your fruit. In temperate zones like here, it's very obvious when the season ends. The trees bloom, they bear apples, apples ripen, you harvest them, trees go dormant. And that's the end of the season. But in a place like Israel, where the climate is milder, some trees bear all year round. An orange tree, for example, you can find blossoms, green fruit, and ripe fruit all in the same tree. So the cutoff day is the 15th day of the month of Shevat, and anything before that was the previous year. Anything after that is the coming year. So it's like the fiscal year for paying your taxes on trees in biblical times. It's traditional to eat tree fruits on Tu B'Shevat, and usually those are fruits that come from Israel or are grown in Israel, like grapes, olives, figs, pomegranates, perhaps almonds, whatever. And we do eat those on Tu B'Shevat here at our home. Another activity that we often do around Tu B'Shevat time here in the Northland is making maple syrup. While the trees may look dormant, when you have warm days where the temperature goes up in the mid-30s or maybe 40 degrees Fahrenheit, and believe me, here, that's warm in the wintertime, and then drops down below freezing at night, that's the signal to the trees that spring is coming. The sap begins to rise, and that's when we can make syrup. We put a tap in the tree and collect it with a bucket or a jug. And then we boil it down. It takes maybe 20 or 30 gallons of sap in order to make a gallon of maple syrup. But this is a tree product that we here in Minnesota collect right about the time of Tu B'Shevat. Of course, there are also indoor activities that you can do for Tu B'Shevat. And so I'm going to head up to the house and I'll go in, warm up. Here comes one of my cats to greet me here. I'm going to warm up and we'll go back inside and do some of the things that people do indoors. The book of Deuteronomy describes the land of Israel as a place of wheat, barley, vines, figs, pomegranates, olive oil, and honey. So these are what are called the 7 fruits of the land of Israel. Of course, there's many other fruits, and if you can't get these specific species, you can certainly eat any other fruit that grows on a tree. I'm going to spend a little time talking about each of these because they also have some symbolism that goes beyond simply eating fruits of trees. In the 16th century, the Jewish mystics in Safat developed a whole Seder for Tu B'Shevat, based on various fruits and their qualities and combining them with some principles from Kabbalah. There were many different versions of this. Jonathan Wolfe, the founder of what was back then the Jewish Vegetarians of North America, developed a version that was passed around on photocopied sheets for a while. In the 70s and 80s, people connected it with Earth Day, as I mentioned earlier, and began to develop seders focusing on ecology and the environment. I led the very first Tu B'Shevat Seder ever held in Minneapolis, Minnesota, back in the 1980s. Of course, nowadays you can find it all over. There's many videos and many instructions, different versions, because it's not really laid out like the Passover Seder where you have to do it a certain way. Simply eat some fruits from trees on Tu B'Shevat, and from there you can define it in however you want to celebrate it. So the four levels of consciousness as defined in Kabbalah correspond to these fruits in a certain way. The first is Asiya, the physical world, and we let that be represented by something that has a shell or a peel. I'm going to use a pomegranate. Now, if you can't get a pomegranate, you can use anything that has a hard shell, walnuts, almonds, Brazil nuts, whatever. But the idea is a klipa, which is literally a shell, also represents the negativity in the physical world. So by peeling off the klipa and throwing that away and enjoying the good fruit inside, we are reminded of the goodness in everyday life. The second level of consciousness is Yetzira, which means formation, and that's associated with the heart, with the emotions. So for that, we use a fruit that has a hard pit, like this is a date right here. If you can't get dates with pits, they're a little hard to find nowadays, you could also use a plum or a peach, anything that has a hard pit, which represents the heart of stone that God will replace with a heart of flesh, a heart of love. So we throw away the hard pit, throw away the heart of stone, and we eat the delicious fruit. The third level is Bria, creation, which is represented by a fruit that you can eat the whole thing. So the usual one that I would use would be a fig, okay, because you can eat the whole fig. I suppose you could also use seedless grapes, or because those you can eat the whole thing, but you want something without a pit and without a peel, so you can simply pop it in your mouth. Bria represents the level of the intellect, which doesn't really have a physical aspect, it's simply the level of the mind. And so for that, we use something that you can eat the entire fruit. The fourth level is Atzilut, and that means emanation. That's the level of spirit, and you can't really represent that with a fruit. But people use spices, and this is a cinnamon stick, which is made from the bark of a tree, so it's also a tree product. Most people also include a grain product to represent the wheat and barley in the seven products from Israel. I want to say a little bit about the wheat here. Some people think that the tree of life was wheat. I've seen that in some commentaries. I don't actually buy that. It's not a tree, you know. We do say that wheat is the staff of life. And in general, grains, wheat, barley, oats, rye are the basis of most traditional diets. But I don't think it was the tree of life. Now, there are those who say that it was an apple. You've heard that, an apple. Okay. And I don't know, some say apples probably grow in the hills in the Middle East, maybe, but that's more of a European interpretation. I've also been told that when the Christian missionaries came to South America and talked about the tree of life, the people there thought of it as a banana because that's a common tree down there. The fact is that a banana is technically not a tree. It does grow on a real tall stalk, but that grows, produces bananas, and dies, and then another stalk comes up. Doesn't have a permanent woody trunk. So in terms of Jewish law and what you classify as a tree for Tu B'Shevat, we don't say the fruit of the tree blessing on a banana. We say the fruit of the earth. In my mind, the best candidate for the tree of life would be a pomegranate. Now, as you can see, this pomegranate does resemble an apple. And so I'm wondering, maybe there was an oral tradition about it. And then as the Bible spread up into Europe, they didn't have pomegranates, but an apple looks like that. So they thought of it as an apple. Now, there's also a teaching that says that God purposely did not tell us which tree was the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Why? Because we don't want to go on pointing at a tree. Ooh, that's the tree that Adam and Eve ate. And so we simply say a fruit, and we don't really know what fruit it was. Tu B'Shevat is also the time when all the seed catalogs arrive. January, February, that's when we start thinking about our garden. We start ordering the seeds that we're going to use or getting out the ones we saved from last year. These are scarlet runner bean seeds, and this is a plant that the hummingbirds really love. And of course, my cats are very good helpers sometimes, and sometimes they're not. But anyway, this is the time of year when we start thinking about all of this. Tu B'Shevat, again, reminds us that even though here in the Northland everything is full of snow and ice, the earth will eventually wake up and we will have a garden and flowers, etc. So even though Tu B'Shevat does come in the middle of the winter here in Minnesota, nevertheless, it does bring us to focus on trees, focus on planting, and yes, eventually, spring does come.